Not supposed to be here today, and I bet many of you aren't supposed to be here either. The only reason I'm here in this country, is because everything lined up just perfectly to allow me to be here. A hodgepodge of laws and circumstances that I had no choice or control over. My family members before me came at the proper time, from the proper country, were of the proper sex, and discriminatory laws that affected my lineage were repealed at the right time. In addition to my personal immigration story, I'm familiar with immigration laws as part of my practice at Advocates for Basic Legal Equality, or ABLE. I see how the history of our immigration laws and our current policies have an impact on my clients, and whether or not these humans are supposed to be here. My immigration story starts with my great-grandfather in southern Italy. There are 4 main characters in my immigration story. Sounds simple. Their names are Eugenio, Mariano, Eugenio, and Eugenio. Maybe not so simple. Here's a family tree. Hopefully it makes things clearer. My great-grandfather Eugenio first came to the United States in 1899. Like many immigrants who come here, he was in search of a better life for himself and his family. He was married to my great-grandmother, but he came to the United States alone. He stayed for a few years and easily obtained U.S. citizenship. He then returned to Italy, never to live again in the United States. His son, my grandfather Mariano, was born in 1907. Even though Mariano was born in Italy, he became a U.S. citizen at birth. It was easy for foreign-born children to obtain citizenship. Well, it was easy if your U.S. citizen parent was 1, from the proper country, and 2, of the proper sex. In the late 1800s, the United States welcomed immigrants from most countries. But let's say my family lineage was Chinese. Well, that's a problem. You see, the Chinese Exclusion Act barred Chinese people from entering the country, starting in 1882, and it lasted more than 60 years, precisely during the time that my great-grandfather came to the United States. If my great-grandfather wasn't from a proper country, I wouldn't be here. And what if my great-grandmother, instead of my great-grandfather, came to the United States and obtained her citizenship? That's another roadblock. Before 1934, a person born outside of the United States acquired citizenship at birth only if the person's father, not mother, was a citizen. This inequity was eventually corrected by a law signed by President Clinton in 1994, many years after I was born. If my U.S. citizen great-grandparent wasn't of the proper sex, I wouldn't be here. My father, Eugenio, was born in Italy in 1939, but he didn't automatically become a U.S. citizen at birth. My grandfather had to file a family petition for my dad. The problem was that immigration laws had become severely restrictive, unless you came from a proper country. But this time, Italy wasn't considered a proper country. In the 1910s and 20s, Congress passed a number of immigration laws. One law categorically excluded people from many parts of Asia, people from places like Lebanon, India, Vietnam. It also barred people who were mentally or physically defective. Not good news for persons with disabilities. Another law targeted Southern and Eastern Europeans. The law capped the number of immigrants coming to the United States to 2% per country. But the government used old census data to calculate its numbers, all in an effort to maintain immigrants from countries like Germany, Great Britain, and Ireland. In the 1960s, the quotas were lifted, and my dad finally obtained his immigration status. A year later, he and my mom, Maria, married in Italy and then came to the United States. My siblings and I were born in this country. The Citizenship Clause of the 14th Amendment basically says that if you're born here, you're a U.S. citizen. The amendment overruled the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision, which held that African Americans could not be citizens. If you were born in the United States, you're a citizen because of this amendment to our Constitution, because of the struggles of African Americans in this country, because of their insistence on being recognized as citizens. Some of you might be thinking, Eugenio, it's 2014, and we don't have racial or ethnic quotas anymore. And you're right. But our current immigration law does have a per-country limit for preference immigrants set at 7%. And this disproportionately affects people from countries like Mexico and the Philippines, countries where there is more than a 7% demand to come to the United States. And yes, it's 2014, but up until last year, immigration law discriminated against married same-sex couples. And immigration law still treats children born out of wedlock differently than those children born in wedlock. But what does all of this have to do with you? While it's commonly noted that we're a nation of immigrants, it's important to recognize that there are at least two groups of people who might not have an immigration story. One, people who are native to this land. And two, people who are descendants of African slaves. For others, I offer that you're either an immigrant or a descendant of immigrants. And unless you're an immigrant yourself, your immigration story doesn't start with you. It started before you. My immigration story takes me back 3 generations through circumstances out of my control. So now I challenge you. Are you supposed to be here? It's the same question many of my clients are asked. And back in 2009, Abel, along with private attorney co-counsel, filed a lawsuit about this question. All of our clients, all Latinos, were asked that question in some form by law enforcement officers. Are you supposed to be here? But the officers might ask if people are here legally, or they might want to see people's immigration papers. You see, the U.S. Border Patrol opened an office on Lake Erie in 2008. After it opened, we saw an increase of ethnic profiling complaints. Some of our clients were stopped while walking down the street, at the bus depot, or at the gas station. After hearing complaint after complaint in our office, we filed a lawsuit on behalf of our clients against the U.S. Border Patrol and local police departments alleging ethnic profiling. When we filed a complaint, our Latino clients were of mixed immigration statuses. Some were U.S. citizens, some were lawful permanent residents, and some were here without status. But if I gave you their names and photos, or a voice recording to determine an accent, I don't think you'd be able to match them with their immigration statuses. And that's one of the points of the lawsuit. Not only does ethnic profiling create distrust between law enforcement and the public, not only is its selective stopping unconstitutional, but it's also totally ineffective. It's ineffective when officers target people who they think aren't supposed to be here based on appearance. Nearly 5 years later, the case against the U.S. Border Patrol continues. And what about those seeking refuge from persecution in the United States. Are they supposed to be here? A few years ago, I represented a gentleman originally from Iraq. He served as an English-Arabic interpreter for U.S. forces in Baghdad. So he was helpful and well-liked with the Americans there, but not so popular within certain circles in Iraq. He was held at gunpoint for his suspected collaboration and assistance with the Americans. He lied about his affiliation, and he begged the gunman for his life. My client was let go, but he knew he had to leave Iraq. Fortunately, his asylum application was approved, and he remains safe in this country. And right now, thousands of children from Central America are front and center in our nation's current dialogue about immigration. Are these children supposed to be here? If you were one of these children living in Central America, what would you do? The situation has created a humanitarian crisis, but from an immigration and border perspective, it's important to recognize that most of these children are presenting themselves to U.S. law enforcement agents. So sending more agents with more weaponry won't help with the unauthorized entries because these children are running towards the agents, not away from them. Of course, the situation with these unaccompanied children is just one piece of the larger immigration puzzle. Our elected officials in Washington tell us that our immigration laws are in drastic need of reform, and there is much conversation on how to address the millions of people in this country who are undocumented or unauthorized. Comprehensive immigration reform could help address this situation, but congressional reform has stalled for too long. I should clarify that there is no magical office in Toledo or Washington where immigration authorities are granting permanent immigration statuses to everyone who wants one. That may have been the process that allowed my great-grandfather to obtain his status, but that's not how it works now. People are here without status because the law doesn't provide a way for them to get status. It's not that people are undocumented. It's that they're undocumentable. Current immigration law offers roadblocks and wait lines that are decades long. Unfortunately, resistance to immigrants has been a long part of our nation's history. President Kennedy, in his book, A Nation of Immigrants, wrote, in 1797, a member of Congress argued that while a liberal immigration policy was fine when the country was new and unsettled, now that America had reached its maturity and was fully populated, immigration should stop, an argument which has been repeated at regular intervals throughout American history. If this particular congressman had his way in 1797, how would that have affected you and the country? Remember, I'm not supposed to be here today, and I bet many of you aren't supposed to be here either. I repeat this not to depress you, but to humble you. Even if you were born a U.S. citizen like me, what invisible set of laws and circumstances allowed that to happen? But even though I'm not supposed to be here, I belong here, and I hope you feel you belong here. Right now, there is a city and county initiative to make our region a more welcoming place for immigrants. And while having the support of the local government is important, creating belonging for all of our families starts with you. Neighbor by neighbor, block by block, school by school. And I recognize that our immigration laws haven't always created a welcoming culture, but our people have. Generations before us in Toledo have created this belonging for new immigrant groups, and it's up to us to continue this important legacy. So please join me in helping create a community where all humans, immigrants included, are welcome and celebrated. Let's make this the place where they belong, where we belong. Thank you.